Kenny, it's a great privilege to have you here. Would you join me on stage and let us have a little chat about digital journalism?
Thank you.
Welcome. Kenny, as I said, you started as a journalist for the New York Journal. Why journalism? How did you become a journalist?
Well, it was New York Magazine.
New York Magazine, sorry.
My very first job was in politics. I ran political campaigns. I never won one, but I kept trying. And at some point, I learned a lot about politics, and I thought I'd write about it. So I got a job at New York Magazine writing about politics. And I did that until Benjamin was born. And then started, I went to, it was called Warner Amex. And I started in the cable television business. And I saw the cable television business grow. And then I started my own company in corporate strategy, and we were consultants to Microsoft and a bunch of other companies, and then eventually AOL. And then I sold my company and I went into AOL. We merged with Time Warner, and then I left and started. Actually, it's all come home because the very first thing I did in the internet on my own was I had an idea that I read a book called Moneyball. Does anybody know Moneyball? It's about the business of baseball. And the New York Yankees, which historically is the best team in American baseball, spends about $200 million a year on their players. No other team spends that much. And there was a team, they still exist in Oakland, and they spent about $40 million on their players. And it was a wonderful book. It was a movie that Sony made. And there was a paragraph where the general manager said, well, I only have $40 million. I'm competing against a team that has $200 million. I have to reinvent the mousetrap.
Was that basically the fundamental belief for your involvement in the Huffington Post launch?
In fact, my first internet business was a not-for-profit, and it was to try to stop the National Rifle Association.
Good.
So I didn't succeed.
Good project, yeah.
But that was the project. And I called a friend of mine who I knew at AOL and said, could you introduce me to the 7 smartest people you know in the internet? Now, this was 2001. There was hardly an internet. But one of the people who came, he wasn't invited, but he just came as an add-on because I think I was serving free food, was Jonah Peretti. And Jonah, of course, now is the CEO of BuzzFeed. And at the same time that was happening, there was the political campaign for president. George Bush was running against then Senator Kerry. And I watched how the internet got involved in the campaign. And there was still is a company called the Drudge Report, which is a conservative mouthpiece. Doesn't make a lot of money, but it's very successful within politics. And I saw how they defeated John Kerry on the internet and thought, well, if the Drudge Report can do that, I can do that on behalf of the Democrats. So I met Ariana, and Jonah was our CTO at the beginning, and we launched the Huffington Post.
So that reminds me very much of the old days of analog media. A lot of newspapers have been launched as a kind of almost political player. So that's interesting that you're saying the Huffington Post was basically founded in order to support democratic policy.
From the heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then usually, well, a lot of times if it started as a passion, it becomes a business. So, of course, early on, we realized that we could expand way beyond politics, and after year 1, we launched verticals, and then it grew and grew and grew. And then every time somebody would ask about our political leanings, I would be quiet because I would always say it's Democrat, and that wasn't good for advertisers, so I didn't answer that question.
But Kenny, there's so much insecurity and here and there even skepticism or depression about the future prospects of journalism. People think quality journalism is basically limited to journalism on paper, and online journalism is automatically going to be superficial and basically has no business model, so journalism has no future. Do you share that view?
I don't at all. In fact, I think it's the complete opposite. And for 3 years, I taught at Columbia Journalism Review. Columbia Journalism Review 6 years ago had no digital curriculum. If you go there now, it's almost entirely digital curriculum. So I think that I thought it 5 years ago, I think it today, I'll think it more tomorrow, that it's a fabulous time for journalists. There are more outlets, you have more freedom, your stories travel faster. I think you have to make sure as a journalist that you start with your brain and your gut and not start and follow what's trending. So in all of the companies that we've launched or invested in, it's very important that with journalism as at the core, that you don't chase algorithms and trending stories, but it has to start with journalism.
What I find amazing, when I talk with print journalists, very often they speak like managers. They talk about restructuring, cost cutting, distribution strategies, marketing strategies. When I talk with digital journalists, they're really talking about their way of storytelling, they're talking about their political views, they're talking about great layout and design. So they're really very much passionate about the content. And in a way, it reminds me of the golden times of analog journalism. Do you see here and there kind of repetition of experiences from analog days?
There's a great book, I think the author's name was Brinkley, and it's the biography of Henry Luce, and I read it maybe in year 3 or 4 after we started the Huffington Post, and I had no idea that Time magazine started out as simply curation, no original journalism. He then had the idea, and he was right, that you can only take curation to a certain height. It's a low ceiling. And then you have to create a unique brand with your own content. And so for me, the success of digital journalism is all about creating a unique brand with a unique voice. It can't be successful ultimately if it's commodity journalism.
And your experience is the more people focus on great journalism, the more important the content is, the better the business will be?
No doubt. I've seen it at the Huffington Post. I've seen it at BuzzFeed. We've seen it in a lot of the companies that we invest in. I have no doubt that that's the case.
But it needs to be a real business. We have these huge growth figures, the reach is growing, and of course this rule, money follows attention, hopefully is going to be true in the digital journalism as well. But we need ways of monetization. How do you see paid content? Is it a kind of dream of old school journalists, or is it something that is truly going to materialize in the digital world?
No, so I think about that a lot. When I started at AOL, there was something called a walled garden. You had to pay for access. We changed it because there were too many busy signals and the company was going down, so we got rid of our walled garden. But at the beginning, everybody paid for content. It's the only way you could really get good content online. Then you took down the walled gardens, and a lot of things are for free. I know we're seeing the pendulum swing now back to paid content. You certainly see it in video. You see it in subscriptions at the Wall Street Journal and the FT. The New York Times has had great success with paid content over the last 2 years. I think they have 1 million paid subscribers now. And the millennials that everybody talks about more and more and more are willing to pay for good, unique content. Not for commodity, lowest common denominator, but for unique content. And the interesting part is, 20 years ago, it took arguably 20 years to build a brand. 10 years ago, 10 years. 5 years ago, it took 5 years to build a brand. You can all put in names, and this is true. Today, you can build a great brand in a year.
So a couple of years from now, most of the relevant digital native brands will have pay elements in their offerings?
I think for sure. I think for sure.
How about distribution trends? I mean, it all used to be very much SEO driven, and now it's all about social distribution. How do you see that trend?
So I like to look at the past for insight into the future, and the pendulum has certainly swung in the digital world from distribution to content. And content now is king, just like it was in the 1980s with cable television networks. First, you laid the pipes, then you started a cable network. All those cable networks have created enormous value for today's traditional media companies. Today, the pendulum in the digital world has swung from distribution to content. All the social feeds are built out. Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat are actually, when you think about it, big pipes. Arguably, Facebook is as significant as the 5 biggest cable companies in the United States. It's a huge pipe where content flows. So right now, it's a wonderful time to create content because you have to fill the pipes. Within that pendulum, there's a mini pendulum that has swung from SEO to social. Not to say that SEO is dead, it isn't, it will never be, but today, instead of consumers going just to the brand's front door, they're getting a massive amount of their information through what we call the back door, through the social feeds. So a distributed content model is necessary to launch a new digital media company.
The most extreme example is Now This, the company we are both invested in. If you click the website, it says website is an old word, so there is no website anymore.
No website.
It's 100% social, which means in fact it's almost 100% Facebook. Facebook is a great opportunity. At the same time, it's also a threat because it creates dependency. How do you see that, and how is that going to develop?
Well, it's harder to fight Facebook than it is to fight City Hall. So you have to go along with Facebook, and you have to figure out how to post your content on Facebook to maximize the viralness of your content. But you can't just be with Facebook. I think Snapchat will live side by side with Facebook in the coming years, and they are building something that Facebook has not built, and I don't think will build. I think Snapchat will be a very big company that lives side by side. And then, of course, you have Twitter, and you have Tumblr, and you have a dozen good social feeds. So you can't just be Facebook, but you can't do it today without Facebook.
So use all social distribution platforms or all digital distribution platforms, then you don't create a real dependency on one player. There are various.
And I might add, the other pendulum is non-video to video. So today, we're starting to see real television advertising dollars move into digital video. When that faucet is turned on, that flow will be enormous. I don't think that it's today, but I think it's within the next 12 or 18 months. So any content company you have must figure out its video strategy sooner than later.
Are ad blockers a threat, a killer of the industry?
I think ad blockers are ultimately will be washed away because of the consumer.
So why are you on the board of Business Insider? Why do you think that's an interesting project?
Well, my family actually invested in Business Insider on day one. So I've known Henry for maybe 25 years now, I think. And I remember when he called me and told me what he was doing, I thought it was an enormously great idea. And over the last 8 years, as Business Insider has gone up, the old business brands have not succeeded because they've not made the jump from traditional to digital. I don't want to name any brands, but we all know the great brands of 20 years ago in the business world that are not that anymore. So I think when you look out into the future, it's Business Insiders to have if they can get there. And I think that they will. It's a terrific brand. Henry's a huge talent. They have all the pieces in place. They have to stay focused on building that brand.
Apart from Business Insider, are there other examples of digital storytelling that you find particularly exciting? Any favorite brands or favorite experiences that you have made in the digital space?
Well, this is a softball because, of course, Thrillist.
Exactly.
And my daughter started a company called The Dodo that I won't get into now. I once answered that question directly, and our portfolio companies, too many CEOs wrote me a note and said, "How dare you?" So I can't have favorites. I learned my lesson.
Okay, I understand that. Candy, to conclude our short conversation and then perhaps to open it up to questions, since you are seen almost like a kind of godfather of digital journalism, how is the media industry going to look like in, let's say, 10 years from now? Are there legacy companies, the big players that we know from the analog world still existing? Is it all taken by tech monopolies like Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon? Or are digital native publishers taking it over? Give us a kind of vision about the media landscape in 10 years from now.
I don't think it's a great mystery. I mean, part of why I like investing is because we try to invest in the obvious, and I think that the obvious is pretty clear when you think about the media landscape. So first you saw the disruption of traditional print. That's going to continue. And you can say how many years it will be, to pick the New York Times as an example, where it won't have a paper anymore. But it's inevitable. Same with not all print magazines, but many of them. When you get to video, you will see, we're beginning to see, cut the cord. So cable companies, programmers, are going to have a very difficult time unless they start streaming their products to consumers. Consumers are going to demand it. When you take a look at the traditional media companies, I'm not saying just because we're partners with you, I think you are perfectly positioned, as well as NBC and Comcast and Disney. I think when it comes to News Corp, it depends what the new generation of leadership does. I'm leaving out the other traditional media companies. I don't want to name them, but I don't see any of them making the steps necessary to be around 10 years from now.
Okay, since we are among the survivors, I think that was an optimistic summary. Thank you very much, Kenny. It was great talking to you.